There's something about believability in horror that hits differently. The idea that what you're watching might not just be a story and that it might actually be real. When the infamous film came out in 1999, that's what made it so disturbing. People genuinely thought the footage was real. The missing persons posters, they seemed real, the fear seemed real, and so was the concern and panic of simply ordinary people living their everyday lives. It wasn't just a scary movie, it was an approaching force, carefully built to make you question whether you had any right to watch this, or if it was something that seemed better in police hands. The film starts ordinary and content, 3 film students with cameras exploring a local legend of the Blair Witch. No different to what shows and terrible ghost hunting shows would do in the 2000s. There was no polished cinematography, no stupidly high production score, and no overpaid megastar actors. The filmmakers cast unknown actors Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael C. Williams, using their real names to display more of an idea of realism. Most of their dialogue was improvised because there's always ways to tell, like this, if the script was read. They were genuinely lost, suffering atrocious sleep deprivation, and unnerved more than they seemed. This created an almost documentary-like approach that audiences could believe in, even over any self-doubt. If the actors had been recognisable or well-known, the illusion would have shattered, and who knows where things would be now if that was the case. Before Blair Witch, there was a film called Cannibal Holocaust. It supposedly presented missing footage from a documentary crew in the Amazon so convincingly that director Ruggero Deodato was arrested, and during his trial he had to prove the actors were alive. Where Cannibal Holocaust relied on gore and shock, Blair Witch relied on absence, dread and imagination. No witch, no blood, nothing turning into one of the so-called video nasties of the time, and no closure, just voices lost in the woods hopeless. I want to talk a bit about the marketing as well, which is what a lot of people seem to remember it for. If the Blair Witch had just been another low-budget indie film, it probably would have vanished into obscurity, like a lot of low-budget horrors of the time and decades before and after it. Being born in '99, I wasn't around for its release and marketing. Close friends and family have said how genius its marketing was at the time, however, and that wasn't an accident by any means. In fact, it worked better than the directors ever expected it to. Before social media, Blair Witch figured out how to go viral by pretending it shouldn't exist at all. In '99, BlairWitch.com featured fake police reports, interviews and fan photos. It didn't say it was a movie, it let you assume it wasn't. Fans called local newspapers as well, asking if the students were missing. Later on, it laid the foundation for ARGs, creepypastas, an online horror series, one of the biggest being Marble Hornets and its inspiration on Slender Man. The genius, the horror escaped the screen. It existed in rumours, early internet forums, and captured imagination in horrifyingly real ways. I said in my 28 Days Later video about films being shot on cheap cameras and how they can create a certain aesthetic. And it's strange to think that a film shot on cheap cameras that cost only $60,000 in the woods would go on to shape horror and internet horror. That's exactly what happened, much to people's surprise. The Blair Witch Project made horror personal. The camera wasn't observing, it was participating. Web series like Marble Hornets took the same DNA, but it invited the audience into the story, creating a participating-like experience. Fans combed through every frame looking for clues and glimpses of hidden features upon rewatches. Even down to modern internet horror like The Backrooms echoes the same idea. Cameras capturing what shouldn't exist, liminal, uncanny valley-style spaces, fear built on our brain suggestion rather than visibility in front of us. The philosophy is the same. Incompleteness is scarier than mental clarity. The unknown, the unseen, the seemingly real, that's the core of horror today and going forward. However, over time there was a landscape shift and found footage's decline. Found footage went from revolutionary to generically formulaic. After the monumental success of Blair Witch, everyone tried to replicate that illusion of truth hidden within fiction. And eventually it became clear the trick only works so many times before audience find it stale. 2000s and 2010s films relied on found footage to create tension, but realism had become style and not believable proof. Then came moments where the original magic briefly re-emerged. This clip went viral with teens and young dumb adults convinced it was real found footage, which partly isn't surprising as except for the ending and photo 1, the film it's based on is pretty dull and forgettable. But just for a moment, fear returned, kind of raw and convincing, just like Blair Witch had done decades before. Well, maybe not to the same extent. By the late 2010s, found footage had been overused. The audience knew the rules. Horror had completely shifted. The genre moved towards slow-building dread and emotional horror. Instead of the holy shit, this is real moment previously done, modern horror said this could happen to you. The camera became a mirror, not evidence of anything, and the sense of dangerous authenticity slowly faded, replaced by mood reflection and atmospheric sequences. Project walked so modern horror could run when you think about it. It taught us fear doesn't need a monster or aggressive gore, it just needs to make you believe. Over time, we learn to spot the broken seams and obvious cracks to separate fiction from reality, but every once in a while in a viral clip or digital ARG, that fear flickers back to life, and that's its legacy, a gentle but obvious whisper of what terror feels like when it's real enough to believe it to any degree. So I guess you want to know where that leaves us. The Blair Witch Project didn't just scare audience, it changed the rules of horror even to this day. It showed us that fear doesn't need monsters or blood, it can live in uncertainty, in suggestion, in what's not shown that lingers with us. It inspired a generation of filmmakers from Paranormal Activity to Marble Hornets to TikTok clips like Megan is Missing that I showed previously, and the endless online horror stories that blur the line between fiction and reality. It gave horror a new language, one that whispers instead of shouts. And did it also remind us how fragile that at the time magic is? Once the trick becomes obvious, the fear and terror starts to fade. Found footage films lost their power as audiences grew savvy, and the genre had to evolve. But that doesn't mean its influences has disappeared. Every time a clip goes viral, every time someone posts footage that seems too real, you can feel it, a little flickering of that same fear. The terror of what if this really happened still exists, and for a moment we believe it for some reason. So maybe that's the real legacy of the Blair Witch Project, not the film itself, not the witches, the shadows, or lost students, but the idea that horror can live outside the silver screen, that fear can follow you home and watch us, and that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what you see, it's what you think you saw. So just to end this, I want to say thank you for watching, thank you for checking out the new style of content I've been doing, and if you could subscribe, that would be phenomenal. I want to do more horror films, so if you have any recommendations, please do say, and I will see you next time.